a general talk on greywater, 50 shades of greywater. For most of us, when we turn on the tap, water comes out. It's almost like magic, only it's really not magic. That water would have been somewhere. It may have been in a river, it may have been in an underground aquifer that would have emerged in a spring, and wherever it would have been, it would have sustained other life. And instead, it came into our homes, and we used it. Can you raise your hand if you know how much water you use every day? This is a gallons per day question. Just you in your home. Anybody? Hands up. See a couple of hands. I hear 25. You want to say, you don't have to, but you want to share?
About 196.
About 196? Great. And if you don't know the answer to this, I'm going to give you two little bitty homework assignments, and one of them is find out, because it's find out how much water you use. If you get a water bill, that's pretty easy. If you don't, you get to do a little bit of math. Figure out how long your showers are, your flow rate, a little multiplication. You can also just go online. There's lots of info on the internet to help you know how much you're using. And when we know how much we use, we can much more easily conserve. And it turns out that Americans use a lot of water. This is showing kind of global water use. We are all the way at the top. 150 gallons per person per day. This is just residential, like us in our own homes, irrigating our own yards. This is not agriculture. And in areas like Southern California, people that have big yards were actually even much higher than that. Like I heard someone was at 190, and that's really kind of typical for this climate. Going down, looking at some other countries, France at 76 gallons, United Kingdom at 40, all the way down to Mozambique, where people survive on just 1 gallon per person per day. Anyone want to guess why the Americans are double to triple many of the European countries that have a very similar standard of living as us?
Yards.
The yards, yes. That is the number one reason, and there's a few others. So we use a lot of water, and our water is also in Southern California, for the most part, it is imported water. It doesn't come from our local area. Some of it does. Some people have groundwater, some people have wells. But for the most part, it's coming from these big aqueducts that are transporting water from very far away, hundreds of miles away, from Northern California as well as Colorado River. And then it comes into our home. These systems have a huge impact on the environment. They did when they were constructed. They continue to today. And water is really heavy. Who's carried around like a 5-gallon bucket of water? Yeah, it's really heavy. And to get all that water over these mountains where they have to cross to get from the north over to Tehachapi Mountain Range to us, it takes a lot of energy to move that water. Moving water is actually the biggest single source of energy use in our state. The pumps that are pumping water over these mountains use massive amounts of electricity to do that. And as I'm sure you're aware, it takes a lot of it has a big impact on our environment to make all that energy to move that water. So when we save water, we're not just saving water, we are saving energy, we're reducing emissions, we're cutting back on pollution. So one of the great things about being in Southern California is when we conserve, we make a really big impact overall on the environment, not just on our water. Who's been following the California drought? Yes, you're all here. I don't need to go into that, but it's becoming very obvious that we need to do things differently. So it comes into our homes, and then it goes down the drain. Who knows where the water goes after your house? The sewer system, great. And a little more, where specifically? The treatment plant, yeah. And I know people are from, well, at least from talking to some of you outside, people are from different communities around here. And in Thousand Oaks, it goes to the Hill Canyon wastewater treatment plant where all the nutrients are removed, it's disinfected, and then it's discharged back into the environment. So what if instead of having that huge water system where we bring it from very far away, we use it in our homes, and we send it right out the drain to the treatment plant, what if instead we just simply reuse that water? We already paid for it, it already came here, and we, with some really small changes, a couple of maybe product shifts, we can simply reuse that into our landscapes. And that is what we're going to talk about today. Like you guys are aware, we use a lot of water in our landscape. Usually about 50% of all household water use is used outside of the home, half's in the home, half's on the landscape. And in places that have bigger landscapes, that number can be even higher. And like you probably, this is kind of intuitive, plants really don't need the exact same quality of water as we do to drink. They don't need potable drinking water. The water is fine for them, they're a little bit dirty, and so we can offset this need for water by irrigating with the water we have coming out of our homes. That is called gray water. In your own home, you can see about 16 to 40% reduction in water use. There's a couple of sources. We're going to talk more about that in a few minutes. But basically, in an existing home, there's different fixtures that are producing gray water, and you can tap into those fixtures and direct that water out into your yard for irrigation. And the reason that number is so broad, like 16 to 40%, is because some homes can only use maybe their washing machine water, where another home that's built a little bit differently can access all of the water and reuse all of it. And also our landscapes are really different. So depending on what you currently irrigate, how your yard is, how your house is set up, you can see this range of savings. And that does require you to design your system properly. It is possible to design a gray water system and not save any water at all. And I don't want you to do that. So. And just one little last thought about the big picture before we dive into gray water in our homes is how much do we have of this? So as a state, if we all or a lot of us started using gray water, would that make a big difference for our state? And it turns out that we as Californians have a lot of gray water. About 1 billion gallons are generated every single day in our state. And that water, for the most part, is just pretty much being wasted. It's not being reused, it's not being recycled, and we have all of that potential. So I know some communities are considering desalination plants right now as a new supply of water. So I was wondering, how many people would it take to take the water just from their washing machine and send that out to their plants to be comparable to a new desalination plant? Anyone want to guess?
200.
No guesses. 200,000?
$200.
$200. And this is like a number. It's actually a percentage of people, so it's a little hard to guess, but think about it for a sec. It only would take about 10% of Southern California residents to take only their washing machine, send it out, replace their irrigation with the washing machine water. And that would be about 40 million gallons a day, which is a medium-sized desalination plant. So it would take a lot of us doing this, but 10%, that's not an unattainable number. And we could be, instead of spending all that money on the desalination plant, we could be putting that into educating and installing these systems to reuse what we already have.
And so I'm going to talk about the different sources. And the first one, just like she mentioned, laundry to landscape. That's the washing machines. And this is the easiest, lowest cost way to reuse your gray water. And if we can even just inspire 1 out of every 10 homes in here to do this, then we will really all make a big difference. So these are kind of the general numbers for machines. If you have a older top loading machine, you can average about 30 to 50 gallons per load. So you can start doing the math. Front loading machine, the high efficiencies, you can do about 12 to 25 on your average. These vary based on your settings and your make and model. And same with the top efficient, you're closer to 15 to 25. And we always encourage people to look up their make and model, and that's a key component in just understanding how much water you're using just in your laundry system. The other, sometimes the next source that people will look into are the showers and baths. So you can do your showers, you can do your bathroom sinks. These are permitted systems, and some of the, like the slab foundations are a little bit more challenging to access. They require a little bit more construction and cost. So that's where you're going to look more for your raised foundation context, where you can access your showers and baths, or even other remodeling or adding additions. All sorts of options come into play with this. With your kitchen sink, a lot of people are still talking about this right now, and right now it is currently considered illegal. It's not legal in California, so it's difficult to legally reuse the kitchen sink water. One thing we often talk about is just putting a bucket in your sink. It doesn't become illegal till it goes down the drain. So if you can catch it before and haul it out, become part of the bucket brigade. And so gray water is never from toilets. That's, considered black water, and that's the key thing too. If you start getting into plumbing, it's good to partner with somebody who knows and understands where to put the proper components for switching over to your laundry or to your landscape. So a brief history on the legality. We still run into a lot of people that go, gray water's legal? It's like, yes, okay, 2009, before 2009 it was not feasible to install a legal system. And there were about 1.6 million illegal systems. So after 2009, it's become possible to install several types of systems, and so that's what we're focusing on now. The ones that are legal and the ones that don't and do require permits are kind of what we're covering right now. So, yes, that if anybody ever asks you, is Greywater legal? Please spread the word. Yes, it's legal. Please tell people about this wonderful option for reusing our water.
So there's a lot of benefits. There's the obvious water savings benefits. There's the time saving benefit. When you set up a Greywater system, you don't have to be carrying buckets of water outside and watering. The system is doing it for you, so you are redirecting the water so it flows out or is pumped out into your landscape. Saves energy, like I mentioned. This is not something you'll see on your own utility bill, but this is something that as communities and as a state we can really look at because the savings are quite large. It also fosters a connection to our landscapes. So people who do Greywater, they tend to be more aware of what they're putting down the drain, and that's good for them, it's good for our yards, it's really good for everybody when we're using more ecological products. And any other ideas, any other benefits that you may have thought about? Yeah.
Does the county of Ventura require Greywater systems on new residential construction?
No, there's no requirements. There's several communities that are creating ordinances that will require like a stub out or some way to access the water, but to my knowledge, I don't know of any place that's actually requiring it. Yeah.
Aren't the soaps that we use in our showers and our laundry pretty caustic?
So great question. We're going to get to soaps in just a few seconds. So there's two main ways to reuse Greywater. We've mentioned this already many times in the very beginning of our presentation. You can use Greywater for outdoor irrigation. That's the most affordable way. The systems are the simplest, the lowest maintenance. It's easiest to get permits if your systems require permits. But there's a second way you can use it. You can also use Greywater to flush toilets. Flushing toilet does not require potable water, so you can replace that water with a non-potable supply like Greywater. But to do that well, the system is inherently going to be more complicated. The systems that filter, they have to filter the Greywater, disinfect it, so when that water goes into your toilet tank, it A, doesn't smell, and B, it doesn't cause leakage. If there's any debris in the water, it will cause the flapper to leak, and then you'll just get a leak, which will kind of probably waste more water than you would have saved. So toilet flushing systems are possible, but on a residential, if you have your own home, you have a yard, you're watering it, they really aren't probably the best choice. You can look into rainwater systems for toilet flushing or invest in really, really low flow toilets. Or if you maybe are a designer and are looking at a larger scale system, you might consider the toilet flushing systems. So when you're using Greywater, it is key, if you want to irrigate, that you are putting products into the water that are going to be either beneficial or at least not harmful to your plants. And we call these plant-friendly products. There are a couple of things you need to watch out for. The first one is salt. You don't want to have products that are high in salts. The salts will build up in your soil and that can damage your plants. The second thing is boron. Boron is a plant mycotoxin, so if you are using it in a product, it builds up in the soil, it can also damage your plants. And the last one is chlorine bleach. If you are avoiding these things, pretty much any other residential product is going to be totally fine for your plants. The components in it will just decompose in the landscape and turn into nutrients. There's a couple of examples. This is a laundry detergent, Ecos. That's the picture of it. It's usually the easiest for people to find. It's sold in most major grocery stores, Costco. And there's a bunch of others. Trader Joe's has one brand, their liquid detergent that's fine for Greywater. And there's more. When you're in the showers, the shampoos and conditioners, those usually are either already very low in salts, and I've never seen one that had boron in it, so they, in general, are usually inherently kind of Greywater friendly. Though, of course, if you're going to dye your hair or bleach your hair or something like that that's very chemical, that would not be suitable for Greywater. Anyone have sodium-based water softeners? Yeah, not suitable for Greywater. So you can look into like a potassium-based one. Sometimes people can bypass just the washing machine from their softener. There are other softener options, but a whole new system would be a big investment. Any questions about products? Yeah.
I do, just because I have a high efficiency washing machine. So of course, they say you're supposed to clean it once a month with either chlorine bleach or a fresh. So does the Greywater system have an on-off switch?
Exactly,
So I
yes.
can take my washer and put it down the sewer?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
What about like those machines that are sun savers where they recycle the water ones?
I don't know about those machines. I don't know. Other questions?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
have a question about, like Trader Joe's has something in it called earth salts. And I've read that in our environment, since we don't get much rain, that that's not good to use either.
Yeah, that's a salt.
So is that, so we shouldn't use that?
It depends. Like Trader Joe's actually has a lot of different kinds. So their liquid, I should have added a little more. They have a liquid detergent that I believe their scent-free one that's very, very low in salts.
Okay.
So, and then they have, if it's a powder detergent, that's totally, you can't.
Yeah, no, the
Yeah.
liquid one that's supposed to be Greywater safe, it has earth salts in it.
Yeah.
And
We
I
did-
just read that in our environment, because we don't get rain, it doesn't get washed out.
Greywater Action did a study a few years back, and we tested the greywater from 83 systems and sent them to a laboratory and analyzed them for irrigation suitability. And even Ecos does have a very, very small amount of salt, but when we tested it, it came out as suitable for long-term irrigation, like no risk to any type of plant. So yeah, just so you know, and you can access all that information on our website. Yeah,
How about the antibacterial soaps?
I mean, those aren't good for anybody,
Yeah,
so
right.
yeah.
Hydrogen peroxide bleach,
Hydrogen
that's okay?
Yep, hydrogen peroxide bleach is fine. Yeah, and last question, then we'll come, I guess last two, you and then.
There's pool water which has chlorine in it. Is that recyclable?
You know, pool water is not considered gray water, so it doesn't kind of fit into this, but chlorine bleach in the water will kill the soil microorganisms, and we want them to be happy and healthy, so all of our soil and plant ecosystems are happy, so I would probably not use that. Chlorine bleach will eventually evaporate, so if you can let it sit around, it will go away, but it would be different. It's really not this. And then last question, and we'll have time at the end. So,
Is dishwasher gray water legal?
so kitchen sinks and dishwashers are currently not in the same classification as gray water.
It's the same as the sink then?
Yeah.
What about bathroom sinks?
Bathroom sinks are gray water. Yep. So a couple of considerations about gray water. It's not potable water, so it's not drinkable. You don't want to have children playing in it. It's non-potable water. So there's some important health and safety considerations. You don't want gray water to pool up. If it's a puddle of it or a pool of it, it's exposed to children, to people. Mosquitoes can grow in it. You know, that's not desirable and not allowed. You don't want people to have direct contact with the water, so your system should really just be directing the water out, irrigating your plants, and it's soaked down into the soil, and it's now plant water or soil in the soil. It's not accessed. Also, so this third point, gray water has nutrients in it. If you're putting nutrients into your garden, that's a fertilizer, and that's a good thing. If you put nutrients into a creek or a river, those nutrients will cause algae to grow, and that is a source of pollution. It takes out the oxygen from the water. So gray water should never enter a water system. It should never enter a creek, a river, a lake. It should never go into the storm drain, because those are all connected. So it must stay on your property and soak into the ground. And a health consideration is gray water is not potable. It could have germs in it, so it shouldn't irrigate it shouldn't ever touch the part of the plant you're going to eat. And that means you can't water root vegetables. You can water other vegetables or fruit trees where the food is above the ground and the gray water is below the ground. And if anyone wonders if an apple tastes soapy, if it's irrigated with gray water, the answer is no. I'm sure someone was wondering.
I'm going to go over a little vocabulary for the translation for the field part that we're going to talk about next. Mulch is something that many people are familiar with. It's just wood chips, and you use that to filter and absorb the gray water before it soaks into the soil. The next one is a mulch basin. And so, you know, it's a shallow basin filled with mulch, the wood chips, and the basin spreads out the gray water and provides surge capacity, because when it's going through the rinse cycle, you'll get a good amount of water all at once. And so this is what prevents the pooling or runoff. It also is what feeds the roots of your plants. So you see on the right, the man's filling the basin, and the basin goes all the way around. It's an entire circle, almost like an earth gutter. So that basin then gets filled in with wood chips. You don't even see it once it's complete, and that becomes your natural filtration. The diverter valve is a key component to shut on and off your system, to activate it from the sewer and back to the landscape. And so the valve on the left here, this is what's commonly used in the laundry to landscape. It's a 1-inch full port brass valve, and you can get those at your local plumbing stores. And the one on the right is more for the permitted systems. That's for your 2 and 3-inch actual plumbing pipes for your showers and your bathroom sinks. And those you can get more at your like pool and spa stores. But once again, those, the one on the right's more the permitted system. The one on the left is more for just your laundry non-permitted systems. So these are a key component to direct your flow. And then onto the bucket. So, you know, we often talk about conservation and reducing usage and trying to find ways that are easy and convenient. Sometimes, you know, especially for renters, a bucket to a plant on your patio becomes a really simple way to reduce usage. You can collect your water as it's heating up. You can dishpan from your kitchen sink or bathroom sink and collect water. You can also use this anywhere you want. Then at that point you have more control where to put it. And then also the bucket flush for your toilet. So sometimes it's easy just to go from your shower to your toilet and then back in the shower again. And so here are more kind of the Greywater systems that can be simple or high-tech. On the left here is a very simple system. You see it coming from the sink. There is a vent. That's the one component too to be aware of, having a vent in your system. And then you see it going just to a basin that waters this tree. And then on the right, some more high-end. This was done by Water Sprout. And you can see lots of, I refer to them bells and whistles, but they're filters and pumps and all sorts of monitoring systems. So there, you know, there's a very broad range in the spectrum on how you can apply this kind of work and knowledge.
So your simple systems, which tend to be the more affordable, as you probably guessed by seeing those two pictures, they are really well suited to irrigate larger plants, trees, bushes, vines, large perennials, annuals. Pretty much like the size of a tomato plant and larger is suitable to be irrigated with simple Greywater systems. They can be, that image was showing you like the most basic, so they can go to multiple plants, but they are going to go to your larger plants, like these. Lawns are not suitable for simple systems or a lot of small plants. It's possible to irrigate those type of landscapes with Greywater, but you're going to be using a more complex type of system. It won't be the simple system that you can build in a day or two.
So back to the simple system. With the laundry to landscape, you know, it's a washing machine that doesn't alter your plumbing. That's the key component to comply with the code, and that's the way you can go away with not needing a permit. You do have to follow some basic guidelines. The county provides a document, it's called GW1 for the laundry to landscape systems. It is their laundry disposal Greywater system. So that's the key thing. It goes through all of the real black and white nitty-gritty, but it's covering exactly what we're talking about here. And the other diagram here kind of shows exactly what's going on. You'll see on the left, going to the diverter valve, and that's basically your 1-inch brass valve, and goes out. You'll see a little vent at the top. It goes outside. A lot of times we'll actually put the vent on the garden side, and then going down, and you'll see it all looping around into the mulch basins. And so it's a 1-inch irrigation tube going to 1/2-inch outlets. And with each load, it just naturally goes when the system's activated. If you ever have to do, you know, bleach, or you have somebody sick or poopy diapers, you'll just switch it over and go back to the sewer for those kind of components. And so these systems, the parts, they're about $150 to $250. And you know, if you're handy, you can do it yourself. If you're, and usually 1 to 2 days is a pretty good rough estimate. And they do have a list on Greywater Action, a list of professional installers. And the range goes anywhere from $700 to the kind of more complex systems, $2,500. So each context is always different. This is showing the same thing with the 3-way valves. The one on the left, the Greywater, the outlet, which is the Greywater going to the landscapes, actually going through the floor because there's a crawl space. So they were able to figure out the path was down and out. Where this other one on the right, you can see it actually goes straight out to the landscape. So it's that one then goes down kind of like that prior image. So this shows you it goes into the sewer, and then that's your control valve, your diverter valve. Any questions on this basic overview? Yes.
Isn't there a gravity problem with the fact that that water goes from the machine up to the diverter?
It's mimicking, if you notice, it's mimicking how the sewer. So that's a good question, is you are trying to work with gravity on your side and do a very similar mechanical motion with the water like it would for the sewer.
The washing machine has a pump, and it's actually pumping the water out, so it can go up and down.
But especially once you get outside too, you do want to take that into consideration, that you're really trying to just mimic and work with gravity and not put too much strain on the system at all.
What's the black device on top?
That is the auto vent, the anti-siphon valve, which is basically, it's a simple little thing you can get from Home Depot. $6.
It goes through the roof or just?
No, it's just a black, this one's going down through the floor, and then that just is the top. It's basically, it's an air gap, so that if there ever is any kind of need for water to pull through the line.
It's to prevent a siphon. Sometimes the systems that run down a hill, the water will actually being sucked through, and it prevents the water from being siphoned out as the machine tries to fill again.
Well, I noticed on the other one, you had a filtration device on one of your earlier.
We'll get
Yeah.
to that in a sec, the more
Yep.
complex.
And we're just talking about the simple system. So this is in construction outside. You see the 1-inch line going off to the 1/2-inch T, and this is before filling it in with all mulch. So you can see just the basic work that's done and how this can be an easy 1 to 2 day installation. Cover it up after it's all been run and tested. This is a finished landscape, a couple of them. And you can see how the valve boxes, so these are where the mulch, basically in here you see where the outlets are. It goes into the valve box covers. So that's covered, and then it has an air gap for the mulch. So it drops, the water drops in, and then this gets all covered up and it all blends in. So there, you can also see that it's watering trees and bushes and shrubs, a perennial type evergreens, so that you will be able to always reuse your water throughout the year. You're always doing laundry. Yes.
In the former shot, the water goes into the black valve box, you said, and then it just bubbles up and out.
Well, it goes down, gravity. It's going into, like you see here, it's going into the basin.
Oh,
And so that's also why you have the mulch basins for the full percolation.
How deep is that basin?
Each one will vary based on your tree, what you're irrigating, and your soil type. So you'll want to make sure that the capacity is appropriate for your usage and your plants.
About 10 inches, about this deep.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
That deep?
Yeah, it depends, but it can be less. It kind of depends on what parts you're using.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the width is what?
About a foot,
about a
usually.
foot by 10? Okay.
Is that the piping like a leach line where there's a lot of little holes as opposed to?
No, it'll be a solid line, and the big thing is there's lint in the line. So that's why you want to keep them with a 1-inch and going only down to the 1/2-inch.
So that's your outlet, and it's big enough to let the debris and lint come through, so you don't have clogging problems. And you can add, in that image you can see a 1/2-inch line. You can add to it.
And so here we have more of the complex, the branch
So the
drain.
Laundry to landscape, you do want it to flow downhill if you can, but it actually is a slightly pressurized system because the machine is pushing the water through. So your pipe can go flat, your yard can be flat. There are limitations, which we aren't going to go into all the technical details in this talk, but we have in the resource section, we'll tell you where to go to get all that information. So the next system is actually a gravity system. So your pipes, everything has to be flowing downhill evenly so the water moves through because there's no pump attached to your shower. Their shower is just flowing by gravity. So this particular system is called a branch drain. It was first invented by a man named Art Ludwig of Oasis Design, who actually also invented the other one. Many of you have probably heard of him. To install this, you must be able to access your pipes. So if you're on a slab foundation, your house is already built, you don't really have good access unless you want to do a big remodel. It does require a permit because you're going to be changing your plumbing, and your landscape must be lower than your graywater pipes. If you have all these qualifications, if your site matches this, this is a really great system. It's very long lasting. It's very, very low maintenance. There's really nothing to break, no moving parts. So here's what it looks like. You have a diverter valve in the shower drain before it connects to the toilet. So here's the shower, diverter valve, and that's before the toilet. Similar concept, it's a little bigger, but same idea. You turn it one way, it goes to the sewer, the other way it goes to the gray water. And then the gray water side comes out through rigid pipe. It's split up by these special fittings called flow splitters, and you go to multiple spots. So you can kind of see what that looks like. That would all be below ground, and that would again come into these mulched basins where the irrigation point is. The cost of this is a little higher. The materials are around $250 to $500. If you have a really easy plumbing setup, a handy person can do this themselves. Often though, with old homes and more complicated plumbing, you really want to make sure a plumber or someone really skilled with plumbing is involved to install this portion, because sometimes there's some plumbing rerouting that needs to happen, but it totally depends on what your house is like. Then you're on the outside portion, and it's a very time-consuming installation, because all the pipes are sloping. But again, once it's finished, the water flows by gravity, and there's nothing to break. There's no ongoing costs. There's no filters to replace. There's no electricity involved. So it's a great system when it's all finished.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Just from that diagram. We don't have a raised foundation, but we do have a second story.
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like it would.
Yeah, so this would,
adjust to that.
you could, if you have a second story, the diversion is probably happening in your wall. You'd have to cut a hatch in your wall and put this and then have an access panel. That's possible. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Would it be possible to have a diverter valve available so that if someone is going to like dye their hair or do something like that, you could?
Yeah, I think this next picture will answer your question. So if you have a crawl space, this is in the crawl space. If someone wants to dye their hair, do they want to crawl under the house and turn the valve? No. So what you do is you attach a motor to this. It fits just right on here. That's a picture of it. And then you run, so it plugs into an outlet. There's a transformer. And basically you run a switch. There's a switch in your bathroom, and you can turn the switch. So you can control this from the house, but the actual valve turning is happening under the house in most situations. So here's some construction pictures. You can see it's similar to that line drawing, but this is the digging. This yard was unlandscaped. So this is a shower. The diversion point was over here. There's one split. You can see half the shower is irrigating the front part of the yard and half the side. And then over there on your right side, you can see that basin with the gray water pipe coming in. And when it's finished, it's all going to be filled in like this. So here it's all filled in. On the right, it's 1 year later. And this was in San Francisco, so the climate's a little different. The yard's a lot smaller than probably your yards are. But it's a great example of how their shower waters their entire yard, and they reported that they never watered their yard again. So for you, you probably will have a section of your yard that you can never water again once the plants are grown and you're irrigating it with gray water. Yeah?
I thought previously you had said that gray water was small plants. Are those considered small?
These are not considered small, like size of a tomato and bigger. They do have some ground cover going that's just growing on its own, but they're irrigating these larger grasses and larger ferns. Yeah, in the back?
I was thinking, gray water and your dog. Do you not recommend gray water systems in the backyard where the dogs can go, ooh, floating bark, I'll start chewing on the bark?
Yeah, so you might have your own. I know some people that they had 2 dogs that really dug a lot, and they just had a fenced area, and that's where they grew all their fruit trees and had their gray water going. And
Okay,
so yeah, it depends.
Don't let the dogs near the gray water.
It depends on your dog. Yeah, in the back.
Where the line terminates in the mulch basin?
Yeah.
Is that covered with anything, or do you have problems with roots growing in it?
So that is what this is for. It's open, so the water is flowing through air. So here you can see the water's coming at this level. It drops through air, and then it soaks through the mulch, and this whole area is basically air, and that prevents roots from clogging. Yeah, if you have the pipe or tubing coming below grade, you have to prevent root intrusion.
Sometimes find in your homes that you have to go across a lot of concrete, or you need a little bit of a pump to go up an incline. These systems do require a permit. It's a rigorous permitting process, but you'll see here it's still using the diverter valve to direct the gray water into the tank, and then the unfiltered gray water is pumped out into the landscape in that same kind of configuration with the 1-inch tubing and the 1/2-inch outlets. So this does require the electricity outlet, and the biggest thing is the permitting, as I mentioned. So here are a couple examples. The one here on the left is above ground. It's one of those. It was easy to go in through the wall, and you'll see the 3-way here. And the biggest thing on the right is somebody had to crawl under a house in order to bury that baby and connect it. So these systems have the pump inside so that they can go into the system conveniently and then get pushed into the areas that are needed. And pumps galore.
Yeah.
You want to mention some more?
Just it's a dirty water pump, so it can pump out the dirty water, and as the tank fills, it triggers a float switch, and then it engages the pump and it pumps it all out. This is not storing the water. It shouldn't be there for more than a day. So you size it to fit, so at least once a day your pump is going to turn on and it will pump out all the water. Stored gray water is really stinky, and it's not allowed by code, and it too gets really smelly and just pretty gross, so you don't want to do that. So have a very small surge tank that gets it all pumped out at least once a day if you need it. And if you want to send gray water into smaller outlets, like a drip irrigation system, you have to filter it. So all the other systems we showed before, the smallest opening was a 1/2 inch, and that is big enough for debris, lint, things to come through, and then all of that will basically just compost in the mulch basin. The mulch will catch it, filter it out, so the gray water soaks through into the soil, and that will compost. But some systems try to catch all that before you get into your irrigation. And so you have a filter to remove all the gunk, the lint, the hair, the dirt, and then it goes into a drip irrigation system so it can spread out the water farther. The more kind of the mid-range systems to do that, you have a filter that you manually clean, like this person is doing. It's not hard to do that. It doesn't take a long time, but just imagine yourself if you think you might want a drip system with gray water, would you really do that every other month for the next 10 years? Would you remember? Yeah, if you're like every other person that I've ever met or heard about, you won't. And then this will clog up. Your pump will try to push the water through. It will have nowhere to go. Your pump will burn out. Your system will all get clogged up, and you'll have a failed gray water system. So this is the biggest source of system failure, maintenance. Something that you must do, and if you don't do it, your system will fail. So I don't recommend you do this unless you get a maintenance contract. You have someone, like if maybe you have a landscaper who comes once a month. They might just clean out your gray water filter, and then they won't forget to do it. Something like that. Or you're the 1% that actually will do it. And most yards have other plants that don't require drip irrigation that can be irrigated with those other methods, and you don't actually need this. But there are situations where this might be a good option for you. And one other note, filtered gray water requires special drip tubing. You can't have this filter and then hook up to your regular system. It's still too dirty.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yes.
I'm guessing that's just a particulate filter?
Yes.
And is that filter installed after the pump, or can it be installed before the pump? Can you filter it before it goes into the temporary storage container?
There's different ways to do it, and that is one way. There's a company called, what's it called? Aqua to Use, and that's the method they do. I've heard from installers extremely poor reports about how that system performs. So I've never had it in my own home, so I can't personally recommend or disrecommend, but I've heard a lot of problems with it. This system I have had in my own home, so I can tell you the pros and cons. The maintenance is the con, but it enables you to, it works better in general to push the water through the filter and then have it pressurized to go into your system. Because otherwise, when it clogs, there'll be nowhere for the water to go. I don't know. I guess it just depends. But,
Finally, the picture on the right,
yeah.
can that water be discharged to plants above ground?
So that's just an example of drip irrigation. That's not actually a greywater system, but just to show if you want to do that type of thing, this is what you have to do. No, it can't. It needs to be covered by 2 inches of mulch for it to be legal. Yeah, but then you wouldn't see the spread of the water, so that's why I got that picture. Yeah, question in the back.
So without that filter, all that gunk would be going into a system?
It's going in, so in the simple systems, the wood chips, the mulch, that is your filter, but it's in the landscape and it catches all that gunk and then it composts for the most part. And once a year you'll have to go out there and maybe remove some debris. Some of these will turn into soil. You'll have nice garden soil and you'll have to add some new wood chips. But when you allow that to go into the landscape and compost, you have systems that require maintenance every year or two versus every month or two. That's the trade-off. Does that answer your question?
It does. I don't know, it seems like it'd be easier to maintain the filter than having to go out and dig up mulch and
It's about a 15,
get clogs in the system.
yeah. It's about a 15 to 20 minute job once a year versus that once every other month or so. But then the next kind of system, this is also a filtered system, but it has an automatically clean filter. So these are it's our high end. The cost now you're going into the $20,000 or to $30,000 to $50,000 range. So the cost range is significantly higher. They're mostly installed in new construction, high-end residential, but they are extremely sophisticated. They have filters. They're automatically cleaned by being backflushed with city water. So the pressurized water comes back and just removes all the debris and then dumps it in the sewer on a timed basis. And these systems, you can monitor your water savings on your smartphone. I mean, really, they're this whole other thing. And they are, you can't build it yourself. You definitely want someone who knows what they're doing, and the cost is much higher. But they're out there, as well as in larger applications, like this is in Santa Monica. It's in NRDC headquarters, so it's a a multi-story building. It's collecting gray water, filtering it with an automatically cleaned filter, and then sending it into the drip system into like these small beds, potted plants even. Like the possibilities are increased. You can pretty much water anything you want with these kind of systems. Not root vegetables, but anything else. And the last kind of system I want to mention are the pre-legal kitchen sinks. Currently, like Laura mentioned, California doesn't consider kitchen water gray water. Doesn't mean people aren't doing it, like these people at the Los Angeles Eco Village. Here's the kitchen sink. Here's the diverter valve. It's right underneath it, very convenient. And I just want to show this as a good example of how happy plants are when they get watered with kitchen sink water. So these 2 papaya plants, I also live at the Los Angeles Eco Village, and that is not my kitchen. These 2 papaya plants were planted. They had no flowers, they didn't grow, they kind of sat there for like 4 to 5, several months. They just sat there and didn't grow. Then a kitchen sink gray water system was installed to irrigate them, and a couple months later, the plants tripled in size. They produced all these flowers. A couple months after that, you can see what happened. They are covered with papayas. So they're very happy, and they want the code to change. So more people can do that.
So when you say pre-legal, does that
Pre-legal, oh right, I forgot. So pre-legal, illegal implies there's something wrong with it, you shouldn't do it. Pre-legal implies there's something wrong with the law and it needs to change. Thank you for that question. Yes, it's a subtle difference, yes.
Is it illegal because the dishwater, dish sink water contains maybe animal?
Yeah, so some
meats and
states,
things
it depends
like
on what state you live in. Some states classify it with the showers and washing machines. Others classify it with the toilets. And the reason the states like California classifies it with the toilets are because some studies have found harmful levels of bacteria in the water. And then if you ask a couple questions like, oh, where did that come from? They were washing a raw chicken. Okay, now let's look at risk. Is it more risky to have those bacteria in your kitchen, on your hands, on your counter, or subsurface below ground in the garden? So in that sense, it doesn't make sense to ban it from a health and safety rule, but it's cited as a health and safety rule. And we can talk more after. I want to make sure we get to finish up. We have 2 more things. So common errors. If you talk to a person who's just heard about Greywater or maybe seen a system from the 70s or 80s, the most common things they want to do are have a big storage tank, then pump it maybe to their roof to flow back down, definitely going to be pumped somewhere, and then a misuse of filters. So we see these errors over and over again, so we just want to and it doesn't mean some systems don't have a tank, a pump, and a filter, but they don't all have to. It depends on the situation. So we want to give you a little opportunity to help someone possibly improve their design. So this person wrote an email to Greywater Action many years ago saying, I'm going to pump my greywater to the top of my property, store it in a large tank, it was a 500-gallon tank, and then flow it back down the hill to irrigate through a drip irrigation system. So what do you guys think? Thumbs up, go do it. Where do I buy that tank? Or maybe you want to do something different. What do you think? Something different. So what might be different? Yeah, 500 gallons of greywater. I would not want to walk up to the top of that hill. It would smell so terrible. So they might have a small tank down here, surge tank, to pump for the transfer. What else might you do different?
No drip.
Yeah, no drip. The trees don't need the drip, and it's going to clog up unless they have a filter, which they could have a filter, or they could just have a bigger outlet. What about pumping to the top of their hill? So you see the trees, some of them are up on a hill. They probably need a pump in the system, but do they have to go all the way to the top of the hill? No. Where should they pump? Right to the trees. Yeah. So if you have to pump to the plants you're going to water, don't go higher than the plants and then come back down. It wastes energy, and then it makes the irrigation part a little bit harder.
So here's another example. So what system would you recommend here, where the yard is sloping downhill and all the plumbing is accessible in a 3-foot high crawl space? And I want to irrigate 10 fruit trees. Is there anyone here that has a suggestion on what to do?
Call a plumber.
Call a plumber. I heard gravity and I heard simple system, and both are correct here. So what would be ideal is to keep your sources as close to the plants you're watering. So for the shower, you would look at doing a branch drain system, the simple low-tech branch drain, and do straight to the apples. And so the laundry then would be dedicated more towards your lemons. And so then you would see how the systems would complement each other, but they would have their own zones and they would stay closest to the plants they're watering. And so one of the things that whenever you're going through your context, when you go home and you start looking at your situation and your design considerations, these are the basic questions you want to ask yourself. So what greywater sources can you access? Also going back to that question of how much water do you use? Sometimes you're often very shocked at the real number if you don't know it yet. The other thing is, if you're not the one doing the laundry, it's good to ask the person doing the laundry how many loads they're doing, because you might be surprised. And what plants will you irrigate is always an important thing to understand. And if you can go to the plants that are closest to your source, and then matching the amount of your greywater. So that hydrozoning, if you're familiar with the term, you're going to make sure that the number of water gallons you're producing comply with what the plant actually wants. You don't want to dump all this water on cactus or succulents per se. So think more about your evergreen shrubs. And we love fruit producing, especially papayas and bananas. Take advantage of those. And then choosing the system. The simplest, lowest tech, lowest cost systems yield the greatest rewards long term. So putting a little thought into these designs really creates an easy way to make greywater part of your life, and one of those things you can even demonstrate to your friends and neighbors. So here's kind of an overall view. If anyone's fortunate to have this kind of context, you can look into how you can do that same kind of mindset of keeping your sources as close as possible to what you're watering. And the Waterwise Home is a great book. It just came out this year, and I can't tell enough people about it. It's got diagrams, it's got instructions, it just goes over everything you would ever want to know. So that's one of my personal plugs. I've already bought 4 copies. So, And so for more information, the Greywater Action website, if you haven't been on it, that's the first place to go, greywateraction.org. So these are, we'll go through each one individually, but the overview, a couple books, there's also an online video with This Old House, some clean water components. They have the kits for the laundry landscape. The laundry landscape DVD, that's with Art Ludwig. And oasisdesign.net is another great resource. And then the Greywater Action Q&A forums. They are a great place. If you have questions when you're out dealing with your system, post it on the forum. You'll be surprised at the amount of people that are into supporting this kind of knowledge. So here's the Greywater Design Manual. It's a little fuzzy, but it is free and downloadable online, San Francisco Water, sfwater.org. And this is that wonderful book I was talking about from Laura Allen. And then if you haven't seen the This Old House video, it's how to install a Greywater irrigation system. It's a great, simple video. It's less than 6 minutes. And here are a couple online vendors and kits, Grade to Green and Clean Water Components. They're both good. You also have local stores, local businesses. Oasisdesign.net, that's kind of the overview, how it looks when you log on there. And the Q&A forum. So if you do have questions when you're in the field, that's a great place to go. And of course, Spanish, covering the Spanish percentage, which is important. So there are more and more resources. Greywater Action continues to work hard on ensuring that information is provided bilingual.
Does your website have links?
You can download, you can download a manual that's all in Spanish, as well as 2 PowerPoints.
But I mean, you have
Oh yeah, we have links to all of this. Yes, yes.
Yep.
Everything. Yes. Yeah.
You were mentioning that if you stored gray water, it'd probably smell.
Yes.
If you filter if you just do the simple system and it goes in your flower bed and they have mulch and what have you, will your flower bed smell?
No. So what happens is the gray water has organic matter in it, and if it's sitting around in water, it starts to decompose, and that takes the oxygen out of the water, so you get the anaerobic smell. But if that has gone into your mulch basin, it's soaked down, it's now just part of the environment. There's no odor. Just the storing gray water is what causes the odors. Yeah.
Perhaps you've covered this, but we have very hard water where we live.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a water softener.
Yeah, we did cover it, but the water softened water, if you have a sodium-based water softener, it's not suitable for gray water. So you can either switch to potassium-based softener, or there's other alternatives too that are there's a bunch of different ones. Or you could potentially bypass a fixture like a washing machine.
Yeah, so just hook it up. What I did is I just hooked it up to my hot water heater and washed with cold water. So only your hot water gets softened, and then the cold water goes into the washing machine. So you don't have softened water, cold water, but that could go to the landscape.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, question in the back?
Is it kind of safe to assume that most of us will have to change the laundry detergent we use?
It depends. A lot of people use Ecos, or there's a few kind of more common brands that people use, but it kind of depends on what you're using. If you're using a powder, definitely. If you're using a liquid, maybe, I don't know, 40, 60 chance you might have to change. 60% you've got to change. Yeah, in the very back.
Just to say something, make a comment. I've been running my kitchen sink and washing machine water out in the backyard for 25 years, and I have soft water, and I don't see any problems with my plants.
Okay. Yeah, there is a range of tolerance, salt tolerance, a range of if you get good drainage. There's a whole lot of factors. So what we're telling you is kind of it'll pretty much be safe for anybody in any situation, but there are definitely exceptions. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah.